Hi, welcome back, and this is 3.6 Timeline to Independence Part 2. I'm going to try to keep this really quick because it is mostly stuff we've done in class. This is just getting a chance to get the notes on, tie it together, and give you a little time to finish up the third creative note because I know that many of you did not do the first two, and this should be up to number 3. You don't want to fall behind. So, in our notes, we've started, we've done all of this up to the Stamp Act, which was a major, major thing. It caused all kinds of protests and riots and a lot of anger from the colonists because, of course, they felt that it was unfair to be taxed when they had no representation in Parliament, which is the British legislature, which is a group that makes laws. So now we are going to follow up here. We're going to get the Quartering Act. If you don't already have that, you should have, but some people did not. The Townshend Acts, and touch on the Boston Massacre here. We're not going to finish the whole thing today. This won't be done. So don't worry too much about that. This will be quick. All right. So, there we go. We know that as a result of all the anger, there were protests, there were riots, there was violence. British sent over lots more troops, lots more soldiers to the colonies, especially to Boston, which was kind of where a lot of these protests were going on. And in order to house and feed them, Parliament passed a law called the Quartering Act, which required them colonists to provide food and housing for the soldiers. This makes the colonists very angry. They feel like this is violating their most basic rights to be left alone in their houses. It increases tension. Tensions rose. So tension is anger, resentment, etc. between these two groups. It starts to increase during this time. To try to calm things down, one thing that's going to happen is that Parliament will repeal or cancel, get rid of, delete the Stamp Act, and this is supposed to be a burial of the Stamp Act. It brings us to 1867. Now, they don't completely get out of the taxing business. They replace the Stamp Act with a new tax, or a bunch of new taxes called the writs of, no, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, called the Townshend Acts. These are new taxes on glass, paint, and tea. Now, it's still taxation without representation, so there's still a lot of anger and resentment by the colonists. To make matters worse, in order to enforce these laws and make sure people aren't smuggling goods without paying the taxes, they passed something called the Writs of Assistance, which allows British soldiers to go into people's homes and shops, etc., looking for evidence that a crime has been committed. In other words, looking for evidence that they have goods that taxes should have been paid on but have not. Now, if you've ever watched a crime show or a police show in present time, you know police can't just go into people's houses without permission or without a search warrant. And that is the reason that's in our Constitution, is because of anger over these writs of assistance, which were basically open-ended search warrants. Instead of specifying exactly when and where and what they're looking for, these would be search warrants that basically allowed British troops to go into anyone's home or shop at almost any time for any reason. They were very broad and open-ended. Colonists' reaction: more anger, more boycotts when they refused to buy British goods. Um, there's going to be a group called the Sons of Liberty, which, depending on your point of view, is either a protest group or a terrorist group. And it's kind of like groups today that you might be able to think of that organize over um, violence, police, like this summer. They became, depending on your point of view, how you looked at those groups, one way or the other, your opinions. That's kind of how these Sons of Liberty depends on your point of view. If you're British or if you were a colonist on your point of view of these groups. Daughters of Liberty were the women who organized the boycotts, etc. And this is another one that a lot of people forget, the committees of correspondence. If you're bored or not, if you don't know what this word is, look it up on Google, what it means to correspond, what correspondence is, like being pen pals, basically, writing letters to one another. And this was how the colonies would spread news among the other colonies of what's going on. Here's an illustration of the writs of assistance being used by British soldiers to search someone's house. Um, Sons of Liberty protest advertisements. Someone being hanged in effigy. Effigy here is a word. So what they would do is it's kind of pretty threatening. These are not real people. They're like dummies, like scarecrows or giant dolls or whatever, dressed up as tax collectors, which they would hang from the trees to hang them in effigy. While it wasn't really hurting then anyone, it definitely sends a violent, threatening message. This is, well, we'll talk about this later. The flag of the Sons of Liberty. This is a letter from the committees of correspondence spreading news. Now, sometimes this violence against tax collectors spilled over, and on occasion, tax collectors, a couple of them, were tarred and feathered, which was a very painful and kind of humiliating thing to have happen. And you can see they're doing this at the Liberty Tree. Now, this picture here is the British point of view. This was in a British magazine, so it's making the colonists, if you look at their faces, they look pretty evil here. All right, so in order to quell things, quiet them down again, once again, the British will send even more soldiers over to the colonies. So like Boston is becoming kind of occupied with soldiers at this point. This is just to recap where we've been and where we're headed. Big event right around the corner. So French and Indian War leads to debt, which leads to the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act is going to lead to angry colonists. Angry colonists cause protests, boycotts, etc. So Britain will repeal the Stamp Act, but replace it with new taxes. In other words, the Townshend Acts. That is going to lead to more soldiers sent to the colonies, which is going to produce the Quartering Act to house and feed them, which can lead to more angry colonists. But still, it's kind of, each of these things causes it to grow a little bit, but most people are probably still kind of just minding their own business and not too concerned about it. Then there's going to be something happens called the Boston Massacre. And the Boston Massacre is really going to increase both the number of colonists who are angry at the British and the amount they are angry at the British. So this Boston Massacre thing is going to be kind of a game changer for the emotions against the British. Okay, now, just repeat, because I know people like to pull in class. Oh, I didn't know we had to do that. I didn't understand. I didn't have that sheet. Even if you don't have this sheet, you can use blank paper. But these are the three you should have done when you return to school. The Stamp Act, taxation without representation, the Quartering Act, and writs of assistance, which this one is in the Townshend Act notes. You don't need to have anything too complicated, but make sure that you label them nice and big up at the top what they are. So it's, and have some explanation. Now, don't just draw a few stick figures, and they don't have to be works of art, but have something that you're proud of, something that is helpful to look at to help you understand, like this, or this, or this, or these, or these, or these. Well, maybe not this one. Okay, so that's all. Please have this work done. You know, just do your best. Please make the effort. Thank you very much, and that is all for tonight.